So, Joe, really what I want to do is to just say publicly to you that when I was down in London, I had the opportunity to speak with many folk over the weekend who were queuing for the line in state and in many other places to pay their tributes to the Queen down in London. And everyone, without exception, as soon as they discovered I was from Scotland, spoke with universal praise and absolute admiration for the way in which Scotland went about saying its final farewell to Her Majesty. And Scotland did this under Joe's leadership in a way which allowed grief and gratitude to be expressed publicly, but also I think people noticed how this in Scotland was also done in a very personal way, which really captures Scotland's deep love and admiration for the Queen, and also in a way that set the scene magnificently for what was then to follow with the continuation of the period of mourning and the Queen's funeral and committal down in Windsor on Monday. So I just wanted to say that. I know you're all very much looking forward to hearing what Joe is going to say this evening, but just to place all of that on record, Joe, from the Renfrewshire Lieutenancy, Scotland owes you a very great debt of gratitude for everything that you did in making Her Majesty's farewell from her beloved Scotland, and that will live long in all harmony. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Peter. Without any further ado, Joe, the floor is yours.
Just let me try first if everybody hears me at the back, and it'll save me using the microphone. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
I'll go a little later into this talk about what happened in the last 2 weeks, but when I was preparing to come to talk to you, it primarily was about the role of the Lord Lyon within the actual royal household, and it was a broader talk about that rather than the specifics around the recent events. But I will go to that towards the end. Very kind words from your Lord Lieutenant, but it was a tremendous team effort, and it was something that I'd spent 9 years preparing for, and I locked a whole bunch of people in St Giles Cathedral on one of the occasions and would not let them out till they did everything perfectly, and I don't think I was very popular on that occasion. Just before all of this kicked off, and you talk about the kind of fear and trembling of taking on parts of this, I can tell you hand on heart, the Thursday before things happened with the Queen's death, I was judging the women's rural leek and potato soup, and my hand was in my heart through that. But fortunately, I managed to choose the President's soup, and of course, you can imagine how the Scots teased me about that. But tonight, it's the role of the Lord Lyon within the royal household, and I want to kind of explain to you the kind of interlocutory or the going-between role that the Lord Lyon has. And I've done this through looking at the role in the history of the Lord Lyon, the functions they do, and then I'll finish up with some photographs around the recent events. Now, the office of Lord Lyon emerged from the ancient office of the High Shenachie of the Kings of Scotland. And it's important that you know that, because that was there in the Celtic periods. And the job of the Lord Lyon was to stand as the new king was actually proclaimed and recite his generations in right to be the king right through to 9 generations. And that's why the Lord Lyon is always present at the coronation of a new king. He was, if you like, the royal genealogist or the royal poet. And therefore, there's a kind of theme there that runs through the great love of poetry that you as a club have. He had a key role in the inauguration or coronation of the old Celtic kings, and he brought a sense of the monarchical continuity. So he was the one that kind of bridged the gap between one monarch and the other monarch, and they took it through in that way. He was a guardian of the traditions of the coronation, and he was the royal court storyteller of the families that made up the Kings of Scots. So that was the early days, and that was something that became important. And you can see how that theme developed before we had a monarchy in the sense that we have today. The office of Lord Lyon, the official title is the Right Honourable Lord Lyon, King of Arms. Pretty good title for a bricky's son from Kirkcaldy. So I don't know what my father would have made of it. He was actually a businessman, but he was a bricklayer to trade and had a building business. So it would be a very posh title. There I'm being sworn in front of the Lord President in Courtroom 1. And that's because the Lord Lyon not only has this position as being a great officer of state and intermediate between the people and the crown, but he's also a judge on certain matters, and that's a function carried out on behalf of the crown and behalf of the royal family. It's also why the Lord Lyon must be a lawyer. He or she must always be a lawyer, because you need to have that judicial experience to do that. I got up at a meeting of 200 young people in Aberdeenshire, and I said all of this in front of them. I said, the Lord Lyon has this history, and he was first recorded in the records of Scotland in 1318, in the minutes of Arbroath, by the abbot himself, who was part and parcel of the signing of the Declaration of Arbroath. And just where that last table is up there, a wee boy of 14 stuck his hand up. And he kept it up, and he kept it up, and I ignored him, and I ignored him. And eventually he's waving at me. So I stopped and said to him, "What is it?" He said, "You're absolutely wrong." And I said, "Who told you I was wrong?" And a very kind of, I was ill-tempered by that stage. And he said, "My grandfather told me you were wrong." And I said to him, "Who's your grandfather?" in a very curt voice. And he said, "My grandfather is the Earl of Elgin and Kincardine." And then I knew I was wrong, because Andrew Elgin has the most magnificent spectrum of an understanding of the Scottish history. And then the little lad went on to tell me that there's a record in the Bruce family collection at Broomhall in Dunfermline that talks about the Lord Lyon in 1308 and appointed by Robert the Bruce himself. So you've got the real facts. The first record of the Lord Lyon is 1308, and it's in the Bruce family collection. It's the most junior great officers of state in Scotland. The oldest is the Lord Clerk Register, who's Lord Mackay, and he's just retired from that position. And there are surviving ones that are still in operation, and my office is the junior of the four. And that gives me what would have been described almost a function like a kind of administrative, ministerial function, like a Secretary of State would have in the areas of responsibility round about. It's appointed by the Sovereign under the Great Seal of Scotland. And in my office at home, I have this wonderful parchment of which the Queen appointed me Lord Lyon in 2014, with the Great Seal of Scotland on the bottom of it, made out of 2 pounds of Orkney beeswax. It's a most marvellous thing, and it's a great precious thing to me, knowing that you carry out directly on behalf of the Sovereign the functions that have been sent on to you. So it's still an ancient office that became part of the political establishment and is now part of an integrated way of which we operate within Scotland today. Here's sitting as a judge. That's in Courtroom 1, wearing the robes of a Lord of Parliament of Scotland. Yes, for those of you who are interested, that is real fur. I'm not putting it in a cupboard because I don't believe it should be wasted if the animal's died and it's been around since the Victorian period, and plus I'm going to wear it out. The wig's horsehair, but it's brushed off the horses, and it's the itchiest thing to wear for too long. And it gives you almost like cradle rash as a wee boy. I'm glad I've still got a head of hair. If I'd been bald, I think it would have been a most uncomfortable thing to continue to wear. These cases that come before me, and that's the highest courtroom in Scotland, where on Monday the Lord President will swear in new King's Counsel for the first time in Edinburgh. These cases are quite complicated and actually have a function that's related often to very significant things over and above actually just the titles that I have to deal with in terms of it. One of the major issues that exists now is that we're in an era of DNA that can tell you more about yourself and what's going to happen to you from your DNA. And one of the things I've learnt in this office is that the Edwardian aristocracy's morality had far to be reached. And the DNA proves it. So often we find, for example, the heirs to certain things are not the heirs because they can prove that their fathers or way back were not their fathers, and it has to go round the side. I've given the advice to all my friends in the aristocracy, and I probably would give it to you: don't give out your DNA in any circumstance, because you might be surprised what would come out of it. In the past days, the Lord Lyon as a judge would just simply affirm what was thought to be their succession, and it was seen to be in a title assumed or presumed that the heir was the heir. But now DNA can shift that, and there's a famous case that originated in Scotland called the Pringle case, a very recent case, where it went all the way to the Supreme Court, and Lord Hodge, who was a Scottish judge but now vice president of the Supreme Court in United Kingdom, said that DNA evidence can shift that presumption. So it's an interesting environment to sit in, and it's a kind of magnificent feeling to actually call these courts. We are now the last heraldic and genealogical court to sit regularly in the world. And I think that's important for several reasons. One is our history. Two is that it's the kind of work, if you're not a specialist in, that would actually probably clog up a civil court. And the three, it actually can reach a decision much more quickly because of the experience around about it. I have spent hours and hours listening to the history and genealogy, and in some of the cases, I've looked at documents that go back 4.5 centuries to establish actually what the case was. And of course, I've listened to fellow advocates at length explain to me why I should make one decision after another. And after 5 or 6 hours, you kind of become, even Robert Burns after 5 and 6 hours of listening can become a bit hard to work through. So the important thing is to see that the Lord Lyon has a history. The Lord Lyon has this ministerial and stately office, but he's also a judge, and that's very important in terms of reaching the role within the household. Here's, I've got a picture of it. I'd forgotten about this. This is my warrant or commission to be Lord Lyon, and you can see the seal with the Great Seal of Scotland in the corner, and that was issued by the Queen in Sandringham on the 7th of January 2014. So on the 7th of January 2020, next year, I'll have been 9 years in the office. And then 10 years the following year. But all done on vellum and all done in the traditional style and language that actually would have been done for about 2 centuries. I think many of you know that I have a crown. My family have told me if I ever put it on my head, they're going to skin me alive because I've been so embarrassed. And I've been desperate to get that crown on my head. There will be an opportunity at the coronation for me to actually wear that crown as myself as Lord Lyon, King of Arms, and Garter, King of Arms, wear their crowns. That's in the Scottish Museum, and it was made in 2003 because the old crown somehow was disappeared away by somebody who had either borrowed it or looked at it for a lecture. But I'm going to go in very soon because I'm fairly confident it won't be a long time before the the coronation and have a fitting. I'm hoping my head's not too big, basically, to go into it. And I'm hoping my family will bear with me, particularly through their embarrassment. And that, again, is to make the link between the sovereign and the Lord Lyons, or between the Lord Lyons office and the royal household and the sovereign. There's in full uniform, both on the right in levy dress and on your left, sorry, the levy dress, and on the right in the mantle of the Order of the Thistle, of which I am one of the officers on. I think I'm kind of a bit slimmer, would you say? Yes. After the last 2 weeks, I've lost 11 pounds in 2 weeks. Just with all, I'll tell you a bit about that later on. With partly because, as your Lord Lieutenant explained to you, there was lots of walking and marching, and it did me a lot of good to get the exercise. Whether I'll do it again is another matter, and it might go back on. And that's in my office. That's in St Giles on your right, and that's in my office in Edinburgh. So there is a uniform that goes with it, and actually that represents, again, being part of the royal household. Here's Her Majesty coming out from the opening of the state opening of Parliament, not this last one, but the one before. And you can see the archers, who are the most magnificent group of bodyguards for the monarch, and they do a great job. And I'm very complimentary about the way they actually carry out their duties. There's the presiding officer there. And on your left, you'll see the Duke of Hamilton, not holding my crown, but the crown of Scotland. And what a hugely strong link to actually stand behind that regalia, which represents the sovereignty of Scotland, and be held within just a foot from you. And he is the hereditary crown bearer of Scotland. A lovely man, and he carries his duties with great precision. And then the Queen came along. This is just come out of Parliament, and you can see it was a couple of years ago, because there's Prince Philip behind. And you can see just how much she was in charge of herself then, and that's only sort of just before COVID that these were taking place. Wonderful, gracious lady who never missed an opportunity to actually make people feel part of what was going on. So again, the Lord Lyon in Scotland has responsibility for all state ceremonial. When I took up the office, I had just retired from being the senior judge on the mental health court. I had 360 part-time judges worked for me and dealt with tens of thousands of interlocutors and petitions in cases a year. And I kind of retired at 65 because I started work when I was 15. And I thought I was giving the government no more national insurance contribution. I did 50 years. And they were getting no more. So I retired from that job, and by that time I was in the office of Lord Lyon, which I thought would be an absolute treat for me, having this historic interest in this and heraldry. And I thought it would be something I would just enjoy as part of my retirement. And everybody kept saying to me, Unicorn, Kingfisher and London Bridge's implementation in Scotland rests with you, Lord Lyon. And I would go, 6 weeks at 3 o'clock in the morning, after I'd been at a Masonic meeting, I then realised what that meant, and I woke up, and it all stuck in my head that in fact the buck stopped here. But it took me 6 weeks for the penny to drop about actually what it was that I took responsibility for. But the state responsibility includes, for example, the state opening of Parliament, the installations of the Knights of the Thistle. This next week I go to the National War Memorial to remember our dead, and a whole series of things that come up. And it took me really a wee bit into the office just to realise that this wasn't something that was going to be directed unless I took in charge of it. And right at the beginning, I took a very strong view that in fact I needed to build up a group of partners, Team Scotland I called them, Team Scotland, that would deliver the farewell to her late Majesty here in Scotland. I get tearful of the pride I have in everybody's response, and that actually runs from the volunteer St Andrews First Aid man or women, right the way up to all those at the highest level of Scottish society and our First Minister. They all discharged their duties with an exemplary dignity and stateliness. And it was something to watch, but I spent a lot of time over the last 9 years speaking to people, building up their confidence, building up their relationships, and getting them used to my somewhat robust style, which can be quite focused on occasions. And they absolutely responded. And I think your Lord Lieutenant reflected that. It wasn't just one person or one group. It was a Team Scotland effort. And we can all be really proud of our Scottish farewell to our Queen, who I think most appropriately and died in Scotland, a place that she loved and felt very much at home in. So there's the Queen, and so I'm responsible for all state ceremonial. And it means when the coronation event, post-coronation event takes place in Scotland, it will be for me to organise that and make sure it's in place. I've started that work a year and a half ago, and we're at the stage where we're looking at detail, such as, do I wear breeches and white stockings? I'm not sure about that. If you've ever seen my legs on a beach, you would know why. So, and it's going to be, I may have to change some of the traditions around all of that, but we'll see. The other thing is I'm determined to do something that this past few weeks dealt with, is I'm determined to involve the people of Scotland. The people who attended the services and the events in Scotland were representative from all over Scotland. And it wasn't just those who you might expect. There were people plucked out of a number of organisations. And my advice to chairmen and chief executives was not to send themselves or their leader, but to look for someone within their organisation that had a personal contribution that they'd made towards the Queen. So that's the state responsibility. Here, I would have told you that I make proclamations, but you know that. Now, two state occasions, the accession of a sovereign and the dissolution of the UK Parliament. The dissolution of the UK Parliament takes place, according to statute at the moment, around about every 5 years. And I always tell the story when I give this talk about the first proclamation I ever made from the Market Cross in Edinburgh. I was brought by 50 soldiers in a double column from Parliament Square after receiving the Royal Salute, down through the Royal Mile, round the Market Cross, and the Garrison Sergeant Major, through the door opened, asked me to go in, and there was 2 Italian students snogging behind the door. Didn't happen this time. And I'm pretty sure, actually, that those Italian students, particularly the boy after the Garrison Sergeant Major spoke to him, will never go into a close in Edinburgh again. but there are, in a sense, I tell you that because some of these occasions do have a lighter side to it, and it's important that we recognise that. And I had to go up 15 steps and make the proclamation to dissolve the Parliament at Westminster with 3,000 people pinching myself not to giggle, because this boy's face, all I could see was the blood drain from there to there as the Sergeant Major literally slapped him from side to side with his verbiage as we go through. But more importantly for our day, and this is a very privileged position to be in, is the accession of the Sovereign. And that was the first time in 70 years that was done in Scotland because of the wonderful and lengthy reign of Her late Majesty. It's done at the Market Cross, and then it's done at the Castle battlements, and it's an amazing privilege to have been part of that and to make that proclamation. And it was wonderful to see the crowd's reaction when I took off my hat and asked them to give 3 cheers to the King. There was a real welcome to the King and a sense of gratitude for the late Queen, but a welcome to the new King. So that's an example of a state ceremonial that most of you will have seen. This was the accession proclamation of the former King George VI. What struck me about this, and the little white figure up there in the Market Cross on your left is the Lord Lyon. But what struck me about this was the discipline of the crowds. They're all in rows, they're all very well disciplined, and they were absolutely in order. And this is something that, of course, we had no possibility of happening this time. The crowds were very well behaved and did their thing, but this was post-Second World War II, so most of them knew how to actually get into rank. And just out of a matter of interest, if I was to reflect on to you, what do you think's missing from a photograph like that would happen today? You all have it. iPhones and mobile phones. They were flashing all over the place and everybody was up. And we have such a record of actually these things personally. But there, no such thing. So a huge move forward. And St Giles, the High Kirk of Edinburgh, becomes the centre of these activities. And the crowd were great. They were just very contemporary in their behaviour and the way they operated. And I'm sure that was because there was as I say, there was less discipline in the ranks in terms of forming ranks from the Second World War. Here's me going up to make a proclamation, and you've seen photographs. This is the one, the photographs of the one that I told you about with a red Garrison Sergeant Major, and there's me reading the proclamation there. The one thing I wanted to do as Lord Lyon before we reached this stage with the Accession Council was to get rid of those hats. I hated them with an absolute passion. I think it makes me look like a dumpling, basically. And so I've replaced them with a much more dignified bicorn, and you'll see that later on. But it took me 5 years to get the hats out because there was a resistance amongst my officers to keep them. Here's the Order of the Thistle, and again, lovely picture of Her Majesty, and that's within the last 6-7 years. So you can see, absolutely, and with Prince Philip in charge and vibrant as sovereign of the order as she recesses from St Giles Cathedral. Marquess of Lorne is the page boy there, and there's Lord Airlie, who has served almost as long in the royal household as the Queen had reigned. So a lovely picture of kind of that whole effect of coming away with the heralds, with Prince Philip, the Queen, and Lord Airlie and the page. Another state ceremonial there. The opening of Parliament. Well, at one stage there was a great movement not to have any state ceremonial at the opening of Parliament. I wasn't involved in the discussions, but it would be a great shame if we lost it, and we didn't. There is now a recognised formality of bringing the Crown into the Parliament to point out that the sovereignty rests in the Crown through the Parliament, although they may have legislative powers. And we come into the building, which you either love or hate. I'm not going to take a vote on it because it might be divisive, and I'm not going to tell you what my views are. But for those of you who know me will know exactly what my view is about this particular building. So that's another state occasion. The governor of the castle, this is Alistair Bruce. I install him as governor of the castle. The role of the governor dates back to 1067, revised in 1936 as an honorary title, and the governor was known as the keeper or captain of the castle. Alistair will be the third governor I'll have installed, and during the installation of the Major General Mike Riddle-Webster, who was the last governor before Alistair, I was going up in great procession on the Esplanade at Edinburgh Castle, slow march, with two or three soldiers and 2 girls from the Victoria School in Dunblane who did the march beautifully. But beforehand, they couldn't get the microphone to work under my robes. So they decided they would strap the microphone box to the back of my head with duct tape. And then pull my hat over it. Didn't see it. And I'm doing the slow march up in great solemnity with this group of people. And one young girl guide for the touchline said in a very loud voice, "Look, look, that man's a Teletubby. He's got an antennae sticking out the back of his head." And again, these stories bring a huge humanity into something that's a very solemn occasion. And I'm afraid to say I'm a giggler. So I had to pinch myself and bring myself into order. But Alistair's done a great job to promote the installation. We were unable to do it in public because he was in his third year in the middle of COVID, and it was decided we would do it behind closed walls in Edinburgh Castle. And there was wonderful stories round about it. And I'm very glad that Alistair's been given an extra year to make up from the COVID years. The National War Memorial, which I'll attend next week, there is a formal procession of which I'm there with a herald and a pursuivant to actually mark our respect for those who have died in the war. And this year, it's the Navy's turn to have a focus, so the naval chaplains will preach and take part in the ceremony. And it's very poignant to be in the chapel in Edinburgh Castle and just to actually remember the sacrifice that people have gone. And so again, there's that representative role between the monarch and the royal household in the office of Lord Lyon. It's one of the events I cherish in the ceremonial year of the Lord Lyon. Now, another role that's played in terms of the actual household is the regulating of titles in Scotland. Two examples I've put up of coats of arms, which you'll either be interested or not interested in. But on the left is the Gildry of Aberdeen. Now, Aberdeen Gildry was the only major city Gildry not to have the title of Lord Dean. It was the Dean of the Gildry of Aberdeen. And that was because they were set up under charter before all the rest of them, and that title wasn't used. I decided to exercise one of my prerogatives to write to Her late Majesty to ask if Aberdeen Gildry could be given the title of Lord Dean to be in line with the city of Dundee, Edinburgh and Glasgow. And they asked for a new set of arms, which are there. That's the Bridge of Dawn, and you can see the Aberdeen there and the Panthers, and it's for Aberdeen. They're there for the prosperity. I went along to their dinner, which was in the dance hall that's down on the front in Aberdeen. I forgot what it is. Beach Ballroom. And I was on the top table on the stage, and I got up to actually make the presentation of the coat of arms, which I did for the World Federation at their conference. And I stood up and I said the words, Lord Dean. And everybody from outside Aberdeen went, oh, no, they're only Deans here. No, you're wrong, and they were actually shouting from the floor. So I gripped my breath and I said, Lord Dean. And they all said the same again when they're shouting at me, do you not hear me? Do you not hear us? Do you not hear us? Aberdeen doesn't get this. Of course, it was a bit of banter. And then I put, with the permission of the Queen, Lord Dean of the Gildry of Aberdeen, and the whole hall just exploded with excitement. And they didn't know that had been bestowed. Now, that doesn't cost anything, but actually what a wonderful way of actually promoting this area of recognition within the life of the royal household. And that was why when we did the posthumous grant to Robert Burns, that Robert Burns in his day would not have received supporters. That's the Tam O'Shanter's Mayor and the Old Pet Collie on the arms, but in fact is a recognition. So I have this recognition role in regulating titles. On the right is the arms of the chief in the name of Gun. Now, Gun lost their chief almost 1947 was their last chief. And the chap who was Ian Gunn of Banniskirk was in the role of commander, which was something that was appointed by the Lord Lyon to try to kind of regulate the clan. And when I took up office, he'd been in the post some 40 years, and he applied for his next 10-year commission. And I wrote back and said, no. Well, most of you know that I'm a great tease. And he wrote back and said, why? And I said, because I'm using my inherent jurisdiction to name you chief of the clan. And I thought he was going to pass out. He was so, but he'd done the job. He had led the clan. He'd become ingrained in the work of the clan. He had actually carried it out faithfully, and he had a son or a daughter, because in clan life it's a daughter or son, but he had an heir. And I was so delighted to go and actually present him with his chiefship of the actual clan of Gun. And now that sets a new dynasty. So the Lord Lyon in the household, I have this regulatory role of titles and positions within Scotland. I should say that my jurisdiction finishes at the Scottish border. I have nothing to do with anything below that. Here's Lord Livingston, and again, Lord Livingston of Parkhead. When a peer is made, I have to approve their title. And I approve their title for two reasons. One is to make sure there's no duplication, but secondly, to make sure there's a dignity to it, because it wouldn't be beyond even peers to suggest something that was off the wall. So again, it's about the regulation of the font of honour, which is the monarch, on bestowing these peerages on. And Lord Livingston's a lovely person, and there you can see his full coat of arms. And you'll see that the mantling on it, which is the squiggly bits around the helmet, has got ermine, and his helmet faces out with gold bars, gold frontage, which shows that he's a peer. So I regulate all of these peerages in terms of the titles and the titles of the new Court of Session judges. Now let me turn, in the last bit of this talk, which was never meant to be, to the actual ceremonies around the last 2 weeks. And as I say, I could not talk more highly of everyone who took part in it. There was tens of thousands of people at every level took part in this. There were those who had high office to carry out and discharge, and those who quietly behind the scene made Scotland's farewell to Her late Majesty beautiful, dignified and stately, and made me proud and made Scotland proud of their contribution. Here I'm doing the proclamation, and Adam Bruce is my senior herald. That's the second son of the Lord Elgin, but not the father of the grandson who actually put me right. And that's me giving the 3 cheers to the King. And that was welcomed by the crowd. Bit of negative press that somebody booed, but I'm not too concerned about that. We live in a civilised society and people are entitled to actually object. I just sometimes feel that our objections are in the wrong place. It's not that I have any difficulty with people who don't think the monarchy is correct. They need to be able to express that. But the crowd were absolutely clear when the proclamation was made and the 3 cheers to the new king were given, that actually there was an acceptance of a new era taking place, with a thankfulness for Her late Majesty. And when the booing, which wasn't bad, took place, friends of mine commented that my face was like thunder. Well, I can never actually hide my emotions. I'm very much, everything's on my sleeve. But the crowd clapped and they drowned out the actual booing. And it was only 1 or 2 people, and I thought that was a great response to actually do. And it's a good tactic about doing it. The word on the street internationally and nationally was that the proclamation in Scotland was something that was very alive and part of the people. But many of you will watch it. You have to make your own mind up about that. I was too busy participating and concentrating on what I was doing. And I remember the first time that I ever practiced a proclamation for the new king. At the end of it, because of the instinct and deep affection I had for Her late Majesty, shouted in a loud voice, "God save the Queen." And I was desperate to make sure I didn't do that on this occasion, to the point that I had it written out, written in big letters, put a big red circle about it and 2 arrows into it on the proclamation. But these are the things that, of course, become part and parcel of our life, that the monarchy, in many ways, becomes integrated into the way that we do things. So it's very important that we actually practice and make sure these things happen appropriately. Here's what I think is one of the most significant, not because I'm in it, but it's the King and the Queen retiring with the flag of Scotland from St Giles after the coffin of the Queen had been brought in and laid to rest for the times of reflection in St Giles. And I think it's just the most wonderful of photographs. And we always need to remember that these people are in the public eye all of the time, and yet they're a grieving family. There is no doubt in my mind that the affection that the family have for each other and the grief, and they are in many ways a family that we need to give the opportunity to actually to grieve, although they're caught up in all of the public activities. But that's a service that I've felt was very poignant, and also it was very good photograph. And again, the congregation were from the whole spectrum of Scotland in terms of representing Her Majesty's reign. Here's Westminster Hall when we took, with my heralds and the English heralds, the coffin to lay in the catafalque in Westminster Hall, and this is our retiral for it. And that's a kind of wonderful picture of actually us coming out, me leading them out, and then the English heralds and then the Scottish heralds behind. I don't know if you recognise any people there, but there's several people you might know. George Way, who's sheriff in Dundee. Roddy McPherson was president and the Messenger of Arms. Liam Devlin, who's a very well-known organist and musician, so you'll maybe know Liam. So they were just superb. I've never seen them drill so well. I did subject them to the present Garrison Sergeant Major Tony Gibson, who drilled them at Redford Barracks, and I thought this is going to be a shambles. But somehow he got it through to them. This was well beforehand, and the rehearsals paid off because they marched in step, kept in step, were able to do the things and to make Scotland proud of their procession. So that was Westminster Hall. A lovely, lovely occasion indeed. And all the MPs and peers were in the hall when we arrived with the coffin. Here's the service of committal at St George's Chapel. And it was just the most moving of services. When they took the state regalia of the United Kingdom, Great Britain and the United Kingdom, from the coffin and laid it on the altar, I felt there was a real picture of history being made. It was just a kind of token representative of the actual symbols of what the Queen meant, and then her coffin slowly but steadily went down into the crypt of St George's Chapel. A very poignant occasion. And the officers there were the Grenadier Guard officer who was in charge of the parade. There was Garter King of Arms, the Lord Chamberlain, and myself. You should bear in mind that when I got there, I had walked 4.5 miles in full regalia to get there, and the regalia weighs approximately 15 to 16 pounds, and it was a... There you go. 15 or 16 pounds. And I have to say, I am not the most pronounced walker. I just don't like it. I would choose to always be driven somewhere and getting in. But slow marches, I'm up for them. It's the speed march I can't do now. I don't know if many of you share that with me. But the quick march I'm not very good at, but the slow march I can do. That was one of the most significant parts of the ceremony for me. And again, it was filled with people from all sorts and parts of Scotland as well as the United Kingdom. I'm hoping this is the last slide, although there's one I hope that I might want to share, but I'm not going to share it with you for a reason. Yep, that's it. That's the Royal Cipher for Charles III, which is not going to be released till next Tuesday, so you're not getting to see that. No. I thought it was to be released this Tuesday, but they've put it out to next. So that's what you'll see on the policemen's hats, the post office boxes, and all the official regalia in terms of Scottish life. That's a talk through the role in its place in the royal household. I hope you've enjoyed my canter through that. So thank you very much for your attention. you.